Sorry about the quality of the video, but just a little historical perspective before I talk about last night's debacle. Anyway, it brings to mind this clip here from almost 50 years ago. This was the very first election I ever voted, presidential election I ever voted in, 1976. And of course, Jimmy Carter is still hanging in there. He'll be 100 in a couple of weeks. Anyway, here's the clip. And this is just to illustrate a point here, how debates can completely torpedo a campaign.
To explore a little more deeply our relationship with the Russians. Our allies in France and Italy are now flirting with communism. We've recognized a permanent communist regime in East Germany. We've virtually signed in Helsinki an agreement that the Russians have dominance in Eastern Europe.
I'm glad you raised it, Mr. Frankel. In the case of Helsinki, 35 nations signed an agreement, including the Secretary of State for the Vatican. I can't under any circumstances believe that His Holiness the Pope would agree by signing that agreement that the 35 nations have turned over to the Warsaw Pact nations the domination of Eastern Europe. It just isn't true. There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration.
I'm sorry, could I just follow? Did I understand you to say, sir, that the Russians are not using Eastern Europe as their own sphere of influence and occupying most of the countries there and making sure with their troops that it's a communist zone?
I don't believe, Mr. Frankel, that the Yugoslavians consider themselves dominated by the Soviet Union. I don't believe that the Romanians consider themselves dominated by the Soviet Union. I don't believe that the Poles consider themselves dominated by the Soviet Union. Each of those countries is independent, autonomous. It has its own territorial integrity. And the United States does not concede that those countries are under the domination of the Soviet Union.
Okay, so that was a legendary gaffe, and it was credited with, along with Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon, credited with Ford's defeat in 1976 to be elected. And of course Jimmy Carter ended up winning, then governor of Georgia, ended up becoming president of the United States. So that was a turning point. So it was a huge gaffe, but it was nothing compared to the disaster we heard last night. The whole debate on the part of Trump was so bad. It was hilarious in some places. And Kamala Harris did well. She looked presidential. She was low-key. And she would get his goat. And at one point she talked about how Trump's crowds, they would get bored. They were unexciting, so people would leave early, and that really got under his skin. And he was real pissy. But the world finally, unless you're really all in on the cult, but the world, or at least 60-some million people, 57 million I think it was, who watched last night's debate, finally saw Trump for what he was and is. And he's totally unfit, never should have been elected president to begin with. And it was always inevitable he was going to implode under his own gaffes, his own lack of intellect, you might say, his own mental illness. I'm not going to say he's senile, but he's definitely a few decks short of a full card. anyhow, and it doesn't help that Vance also is similarly a gift to the Democrats. So at this point, I think Trump is done. I think the Republicans are done for the presidency this go round. Another Trump might be in the pipeline in 2028 or 2032, God forbid, or the GOP might try to salvage itself, but they would have to. They've alienated so many party regulars, you know, like Dick Cheney and Lynn Cheney, or not Lynn Cheney, Liz Cheney, and others, many others, that just, they were totally, you know, just would not support Trump because he's mentally unfit. And so any Democrat would have beaten him. And Biden would have won in a huge rout. And Harris will do about as well as Biden would have done. But for Harris, it would have been harder if it had been somebody else other than Trump. It would have been much harder for her. But the only question now is the down ticket races, how those will pan out. How many seats the Democrats will gain in the House. They're expected to retake the House. And if they hang on to the Senate, which there's a good chance now they will, despite all the Democratic Senate seats up for grabs. How the state houses turn out. It'll be interesting, but of course the thing that's going to decide it is abortion. And that got discussed last night, and Trump was not very impressive there. But of course the lowlight, the thing that killed off his presidential chances, far worse than Gerald Ford, was this. And I hope the sound comes out okay on these video clips. And if they don't, then you can just, you know, turn it up or just use headphones. But here's the absolute low point of U.S. presidential debates. And watch how Kamala Harris reacts, Vice President Harris. So let's take a look.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame. As far as rallies are concerned, as far as the reason they go is they like what I say. They want to bring our country back. They want to make America great again. It's a very simple phrase, make America great again. She's destroying this country, and if she becomes president, this country doesn't have a chance of success. Not only success, we'll end up being Venezuela on steroids.
I just want to clarify here. You bring up Springfield, Ohio, and ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well, I've seen people on television.
Let me just say here, this is
the people on television say my dog was taken and used for food. So maybe he said that, and maybe that's a good thing to say for a city manager.
I'm not taking this from
television.
television.
But the people on television say their dog was eaten by the people that went there.
Again, the Springfield city manager says there's no evidence of that. Vice President Harris, I'll let you respond to the rest of what you've heard.
You talk about extreme.
And that, you know, you have to give, you have to give ABC credit that they actually fact-checked, unlike CNN with the Biden and Trump debate in June. They actually did on-the-spot fact-checking. And Trump just fell apart like a house of cards because he didn't get his way. So not likely there'll be any more presidential debates. You know, he's done. And he came across like Captain Queeg in the Caine Mutiny or Lonesome Rhodes in A Face in the Crowd. He just fell apart. So anyway, so I just stick a fork in Donald Trump. He's done. So is J.D. Vance. And I'm looking forward to this election being over with and we finally keep some sanity back in Washington, at least comparatively. And on that happy note, that is it.